Asterisk, asterisk, single dad fixed a stranger's tire. Is horror camp. Then a black SUV pulled up behind him. Asterisk, asterisk. Are you done fixing that tire, or are you planning to rob me after? The woman snapped through the rain. She stood beside her luxury SUV like she owned the whole highway's shoulder, like the wet gravel was offended to be under her heels. Elias Mitchell didn't flinch at her tone. He only tightened the final lug nut, set the wrench down on the wet pavement, and rose slowly, rain sliding off the hood of his old canvas jacket. He was taller than she'd guessed when he'd been crouched near the wheel, broader too, with the kind of stillness that didn't belong to a nervous roadside drifter. His deep brown hands were steady, calloused, stained with grease that never fully came out no matter how much he scrubbed. The irritation in her voice hit something in him that refused to be insulted into carelessness. The single dad had spent the whole day chasing small jobs across the county, patching transmissions, swapping brake pads, stretching every bill until it almost tore. His daughter, Lena, was home with a neighbor, probably pretending not to worry, probably staring at the kitchen clock, the way she always did when he said he'd be back before dinner, and the sky turned dark before he could make good on it. He'd stopped because a stranded driver on the side of the road was still a stranded driver, no matter how polished the car or how sharp the words. People like to think kindness belonged to people who could afford it. In his experience, it was usually the other way around. The woman stood near the rear passenger door, one heel sinking into gravel, one hand gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles showed pale even in the wash of hazard lights. She wore a fitted charcoal coat over clothes too expensive for the shoulder of a service road, and everything about her said she lived in rooms where other people opened doors before she reached them. Her face was composed, but her eyes kept cutting down the road and then back to him, measuring risk, revising it, measuring again. That was when the first black SUV swung in behind her vehicle and braked. Then came another and another. Doors opened almost in unison. Men in dark suits stepped out with the quick, controlled movement of people trained to assume the worst before anyone else even noticed it. One of them barked an order into the night. Another scanned the tree line. A third locked eyes with Elias and headed toward him like the rain itself had given him a target. The woman's posture changed at once, not relaxed, not relieved, recognized. So she wasn't just rich, she was protected. The nearest man stopped 3 feet away, gaze dropping to the tire iron at Elias's feet before rising to his face. His expression held that particular kind of contempt reserved for laborers found too close to money. "Step back from the vehicle," he said, "now." Elias raised both hands, a little more tired than intimidated. "Tires changed. Jack's still under load. If you move it too fast, you'll shift the balance." I said, "Step back." He took one step, no more. Rain tapped the metal rim behind him and hissed on the hot hood of one of the new arrivals. The woman opened her mouth like she meant to explain, then shut it again when a second guard reached her side. She wasn't scared of Elias. She was scared of whatever had made this response necessary. That was when he looked back at the wheel he'd just finished. The blowout had bothered him from the start. Tires failed all the time, but not like that. The tear along the sidewall hadn't looked random. The scoring near the inner edge had been too neat, too controlled, and behind the assembly, something in the wheel well caught the light in a way it shouldn't have. He'd noticed it while kneeling in the water, but the woman had been tense. Traffic had been rushing by, and he'd told himself he would mention it once she calmed down. Now the convoy was here. Now men with earpieces and sidearms were treating a flat tire like an active threat. And now his stomach tightened with the old instinct he had spent years trying to bury under invoices, overtime, and school pickup schedules. The man in front of him followed his gaze. "What are you looking at?" Elias didn't answer right away. He crouched despite the warning in the guard's face, reached toward the wheel well, then stopped short of touching it. The rain had cleared the dust enough for him to see it cleanly now. Not road damage, not wear, not coincidence. Careful, deliberate tampering. When he stood again, the calm in him had changed shape. "You don't want her driving this car," he said. The woman stared at him. The lead guard took one step closer. Highway lights flashed across wet metal, black paint, and the thin silver line of danger hidden behind the wheel. And for the first time that night, every eye on the shoulder turned exactly where he was looking. Rain hammered the asphalt as the head of security followed the mechanic's gaze into the wheel well. For a moment, the man said nothing, only squinting through the glare of hazard lights reflecting off the wet metal. "What exactly are you implying?" he asked. Elias wiped his hands slowly on the rag hanging from his back pocket. "I'm not implying anything," he said evenly. "I'm telling you the tire wasn't the real problem." The guard straightened, irritation flashing across his face. "We didn't ask for a diagnosis. You were asked to change a tire." "And I did," Elias replied quietly. "But you might want to look closer before you send her back onto the highway." The security team exchanged brief glances. The convoy engines idled behind them, deep and steady like restrained thunder. Traffic roared past in bursts of white headlights, spraying mist across the shoulder. Victoria Hale stepped forward from the shelter of the open SUV door. Her voice carried calm authority now, far different from the sharp tone she'd used earlier. "What do you think you see?" she asked. Marcus Trent, her head of security, turned slightly toward her. "Ma'am, I suggest we handle this internally." Victoria didn't move her eyes from the mechanic. "I asked him." Elias crouched again beside the wheel, careful not to touch anything this time. Rain trickled down the rim as he pointed toward the line tucked behind the assembly. "Do you see that shine right there?" he said. Marcus leaned closer despite himself. "That's rain." "Not quite," Elias replied. "Rain would coat the whole line. That spot's clean, like someone wiped it recently." The guard's jaw tightened. "That doesn't mean sabotage." "No," Elias agreed calmly. "But the damage on the tire does." Victoria stepped closer. Her coat darkened with rain as she bent slightly to see where he was pointing. "What damage?" Elias traced the air just above the tire's shredded edge. "Those marks are too uniform," he explained. "A blowout from road debris, tears jagged. This one was weakened first." Marcus folded his arms. "You're telling us someone tampered with the tire?" "I'm telling you someone set it up to fail at speed," Elias said. "And what's behind it, if it lets go, would finish the job." The words hung in the rain. Marcus's expression hardened. "And how exactly would a roadside mechanic know that?" Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood, looking out at the dark highway stretching beyond the guardrail. Headlights streaked past like distant comets. When he spoke again, his voice carried that same steady calm. "Because I've seen it before." Marcus took a step closer. "Where?" Elias met his eyes. "Vehicles designed to look safe until they're moving fast enough that failure doesn't look intentional." Victoria's gaze sharpened. The security team shifted uneasily. One of the guards leaned down to examine the area more closely. "Marcus," the man murmured. Marcus crouched beside him, frowning. The rain had washed the area clean enough now that what Elias pointed out was impossible to ignore. Marcus's breath slowed. "That's," he began. "Not road damage," Elias finished quietly. Victoria straightened, her expression cooling into something sharper than irritation. "Could it fail immediately?" she asked. Elias shook his head. "No, that's the point." Marcus looked up at him. "What do you mean?" "Whoever did it didn't want the car to fail here," Elias said. "They wanted it to fail later." Victoria's voice dropped. "At speed." Elias nodded. Marcus rose quickly, turning to his team. "No one moves that vehicle." The command snapped through the rain like a whip. Two guards immediately blocked the lane behind the disabled SUV, while another scanned the surrounding woods with a flashlight. Victoria crossed her arms, studying the quiet mechanic standing in front of her. "Do you notice this while fixing the tire?" she asked. "Part of it. And you didn't say anything earlier." Elias shrugged faintly. "You were in a hurry, and I wasn't sure yet." Marcus faced him again. "You're telling me you spotted a professional sabotage job in 5 minutes on the side of a highway?" Elias glanced back at the wheel, closer to 3. Marcus exhaled slowly, frustration warring with logic. The rain continued to fall harder now, drumming against the convoy roofs. Victoria tilted her head slightly. "What's your name?" she asked. "Elias," he said. "Just Elias. Elias Mitchell." Marcus studied him more carefully now. Grease-stained boots, old jacket, calloused hands. Tight curls flattened by rain along his hairline. Nothing about the man fit the calm certainty he'd just shown. Marcus spoke again, slower this time. If this is sabotage, then whoever did it expected her to drive away. Exactly. Victoria looked at the damaged wheel. And if we had... Elias met her gaze. You probably wouldn't make it to the next exit. Silence followed. Even the traffic seemed quieter for a moment. Marcus turned to one of his men. Full sweep of the vehicle. The guard nodded and moved immediately. Victoria remained where she was, watching the mechanic in the rain. You stopped because you wanted to help, she said. And now you're telling me someone tried to kill me. Elias didn't look away. I'm telling you someone set a trap. Marcus stepped back and towards them. If that's true, he said slowly, then we have a bigger problem. Victoria nodded. Yes. Then she looked again at the single dad standing beside the wheel, which meant, she added, we might also have the right person standing in the rain. Marcus frowned. Ma'am. Victoria gestured toward Elias. He saw something my entire security team missed. Marcus looked at the mechanic again. Mr. Mitchell, he said carefully, how exactly did you learn to spot something like this? Elias hesitated. Not long, just long enough for the old life he'd buried to brush briefly against the present. Let's just say, he said quietly, I used to work around vehicles that people really wanted destroyed. Marcus stared at him. The rain grew heavier, and for the first time since the convoy arrived, the most powerful people on that dark stretch of highway were listening to the quiet mechanic. Before the story continues, if you enjoy stories where the overlooked person turns out to be the most important one in the room, subscribe and stay with us. The next moments on that roadside would prove exactly why. Because Elias Mitchell wasn't finished looking at that car yet. Marcus Trent remained crouched beside the wheel long after Elias finished speaking. Rainwater slid down the edge of the SUV and dripped steadily onto the pavement, forming a thin stream that ran toward the gutter of the shoulder. The security chief didn't like what he was seeing, and he liked even less that the man who'd spotted it first was standing there in worn boots with a socket wrench still lying beside him. "The flashlight," Marcus said. One of his men handed it over instantly. The beam cut through the rain and illuminated the assembly. For several seconds, Marcus said nothing. Whatever had been altered was subtle, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. He did now. "That's clean work," he muttered. Elias nodded once. "Too clean for a highway debris." Marcus straightened slowly, water running off the brim of his collar. "Full inspection," he ordered. "Engine compartment, undercarriage, electronics, everything." Two guards moved immediately, sliding under the SUV with portable lights, while another opened the hood. Victoria Hale watched the operation unfold with quiet intensity. Someone had tampered with her vehicle. Someone had done it precisely enough that her own security detail missed it. And the only reason she knew now was because a single dad with grease on his hands had decided to stop and help. Her gaze shifted to Elias again. He wasn't watching her. He was watching the road, not the convoy. The road. Traffic blurred past in long streaks of white and red light. Rain hammered against the asphalt in steady waves. Elias finally spoke. "How long was the car parked before the tire blew?" Victoria answered without hesitation. 10 minutes. Marcus glanced at her. "At the gas station," she clarified. "I stepped inside to take a call." Elias nodded slowly. "That's enough time." Marcus crossed his arms. "Enough time for what?" "For someone to mess with what they needed to mess with," Elias said, "and then walk away." One of the guards slid out from under the SUV, wiping rain from his face. "Marcus," he said quietly. The security chief turned. "There's another issue?" The guard held up a small object he'd found lodged near the suspension. Marcus took it and examined it in the flashlight beam, expression hardening. Victoria stepped closer. "Meaning?" Elias answered before Marcus could. "It's part of the setup, something meant to make a failure happen when the car's moving." Victoria's eyes narrowed. Marcus looked between the two of them. "That's still only half the problem." Elias nodded. "The rest is what you already saw." The rain intensified, pounding against the convoy vehicles. One of the security drivers approached Marcus quickly. "Sir, we may have something else." Marcus turned sharply. "What?" The driver pointed towards the rear. "Look at the trail." The wet pavement revealed something that hadn't been visible before, a faint sheen near the tire. Marcus's jaw tightened. Fluid. Victoria went still. Elias exhaled slowly. That would have dropped pressure fast once it opened. Marcus rose again, running a hand through rain-soaked hair. This wasn't random. No, Elias said quietly. It was planned. The security chief turned toward the dark highway stretching ahead. Planned for where? Elias followed his gaze. Because whoever did this expected you to drive away. Marcus crossed his arms. And now we haven't. Right. The security chief frowned. So what does that mean? Elias glanced down the road again. Rain blurred the distant curve. It means the plan just changed. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Changed how? Elias looked at the convoy, then at the dark road beyond it. If I were the one who set that trap, he said quietly, I wouldn't stop at one. Victoria's voice dropped. You think there's more? Elias met her eyes. I think someone out there expected this convoy to crash tonight. The convoy engines hummed, and suddenly the quiet roadside repair felt less like a delay and more like the beginning of something far worse. Rain continued to pour over the convoy, turning the shoulder of the highway into a slick ribbon of reflected light. The guards moved quickly now, checking undercarriages, scanning with handheld devices. Marcus Trent stood in the middle of it all, watching the quiet mechanic who had just overturned the entire security assessment of the evening. You're saying someone planned for the car to fail at that turn, Marcus said. Elias nodded once. And you're saying if we'd driven off 10 minutes ago, Marcus added, you'd probably be cleaning wreckage out of the guardrail right now. Elias didn't correct him. Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose. That possibility settled into the air like a weight. Victoria wrapped her arms lightly around herself against the cold rain, though her mind was moving too fast to notice the weather anymore. Marcus, she said calmly, assume the sabotage is real. Marcus looked at her. Yes, ma'am. Then assume whoever did it hasn't given up just because we stopped. Marcus turned toward his team. Expand the perimeter, 200 yards both directions. Guards moved instantly, spreading along the roadside and into the dark tree line with flashlights. Elias watched them go. They're looking in the wrong place, he said quietly. Marcus glanced at him. What do you mean? If someone wanted this to happen at speed, Elias explained, they didn't need to watch the crash. They just needed to make sure you left. Victoria stepped closer. So the person who did this could already be gone. Maybe. Marcus frowned. Or maybe they're waiting to see if the trap worked. Elias didn't disagree. Thunder rolled faintly across the distant hills. One of the guards hurried back toward Marcus. Sir, convoy vehicles 2 and 3 are clear. Marcus nodded. Keep checking. The guard jogged off again. Victoria studied the disabled SUV. How long would that have held if we'd kept driving? Elias crouched again. At highway speed, maybe a mile, maybe less. Marcus followed the calculation in his head. That curve is half a mile away. Victoria looked down the dark road, meaning the failure would have happened right in the turn. Marcus ran a hand down his jaw. Whoever did this knew the route. Elias stood again. Whoever did this knew you. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He answered quickly. Trent, a voice spoke urgently through the speaker. Marcus's expression changed. Say that again. Elias watched carefully. Victoria waited. Marcus listened another few seconds before hanging up. What is it? Victoria asked. Marcus looked at her. The fuel crew at the last stop just reported a suspicious vehicle. Victoria's eyes sharpened. What kind? White cargo van, parked across the lot for about 15 minutes. Elias spoke quietly. Same window of time your car was unattended. Marcus nodded slowly. Exactly. Victoria frowned. Did anyone get a plate number? Marcus shook his head. No cameras facing that direction. Elias exhaled. That's not sloppy, he said. That's deliberate. Marcus studied him. You're awfully confident about that. Elias met his gaze calmly. People who plan something like this don't improvise. Victoria crossed her arms again. Then the question becomes obvious. Marcus finished the thought. Who wants you dead? Victoria's expression hardened slightly. Quite a few people, actually. Elias raised an eyebrow. That's comforting. Victoria almost smiled despite the tension. Marcus looked down the highway again. If that van followed the convoy, then the driver knows the plan failed. Elias nodded grimly. Which means they'll adjust. Another guard jogged towards them. Sir, remaining vehicles are clear. Marcus exhaled with relief. At least the convoy itself is safe. Elias glanced back at the disabled SUV. Except that one. Marcus nodded. We'll tow it. Elias shook his head. Marcus frowned. What? If what's been altered shifts the wrong way, Elias said, choosing his words carefully, moving it wrong could trigger the failure too. Marcus stared at him. You're telling me the car is basically a rolling trap? Pretty much. Victoria sighed softly. Wonderful. The rain slowed further, leaving only a light drizzle now. Marcus stepped closer to Elias. All right, you've clearly seen things like this before. Elias didn't deny it. So I'm asking directly, Marcus continued. What's the safest way to move that vehicle? Elias looked at the damaged wheel again. Then he looked down the highway, then back at Marcus. You don't move it yet. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? You stabilize it first, Elias said. Keep it from shifting further. Marcus crossed his arms. And how do we do that? With the right tools. Marcus gestured toward the convoy. We have tools. Elias shook his head. Not the kind this needs. Victoria's eyes narrowed. You're saying you know how to fix it? Elias nodded. Marcus looked skeptical. In the rain, on the side of the highway? Elias shrugged. I've worked in worse places. Marcus studied him carefully. You really were around military vehicles, weren't you? Elias didn't answer. Victoria looked between them. Marcus finally said, Yes, ma'am. Let him try. Marcus hesitated. Every instinct told him to rely on his own team, but the evidence behind that wheel was impossible to ignore. Finally, he nodded. All right, he said slowly. He turned back to Elias. Show us how it's done. The mechanic stepped toward the damaged wheel again, and as he knelt down in the fading rain, every guard in that convoy watched carefully, because the quiet man fixing a tire was about to become the most important person on that entire highway. Elias knelt beside the wheel again, rainwater dripping from the edge of the SUV onto the back of his jacket. The convoy's headlights cast long white beams across the pavement, turning the small patch of road into a makeshift operating table. Marcus Trent stood close behind him, arms folded, watching every movement. You said stabilize it, Marcus said. Yeah, Elias replied calmly, and you can do that here. Elias opened the worn tool bag he'd pulled from the bed of his pickup, parked a few yards behind them. Inside were ordinary tools, wrenches, clamps, a pressure gauge taped together with old electrical tape. Nothing about it looked impressive, but Elias handled each piece with quiet precision, like his hands already knew the sequence. Victoria stepped closer, ignoring the damp pavement beneath her shoes. What exactly are you doing? She asked. Elias held up a small metal clamp. Temporary lock. Marcus frowned. You carry that around for flat tires? Elias gave a faint shrug. Sometimes jobs turn into bigger problems. He slid partially under the SUV, shoulders disappearing beneath the chassis as he reached toward the area he'd been watching. A guard instinctively crouched beside him with a flashlight. For several seconds, the only sound was the steady tapping of rain and the low hum of the convoy engines. Then Elias spoke from under the vehicle. Whoever did this knew exactly where to do it. Marcus crouched lower. You keep saying that. Because it's true. Elias tightened something with a short, metallic click. Things don't fail this cleanly unless someone wants them to. Victoria crossed her arms. You're certain this was intentional? Yes. Marcus watched carefully as Elias adjusted the clamp. You sound like you've investigated sabotage before. A quiet pause followed. Then Elias slid out from beneath the SUV. His face was wet, streaked with rain and grease against warm brown skin. Tight curls clung to his forehead. Investigated it, he said. Prevented it. Cleaned up after it. Marcus studied him again. That doesn't sound like roadside mechanic work. It isn't. Victoria's curiosity deepened. Where did you learn it? Elias leaned back on his heels, examining the area again. Convoys. Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Victoria. Military convoys. Elias didn't confirm it directly, but he didn't deny it either. Instead, he tightened the clamp another fraction. Something hissed softly as pressure equalized. Marcus heard it immediately. You just sealed it. Temporarily, Elias corrected. It'll hold long enough to move the car safely. Victoria exhaled slowly. You did that in under 2 minutes. Elias wiped his hands again. Didn't have the luxury of taking longer where I learned it. Marcus leaned closer to inspect the repair. Pressure looks stable, he admitted. Elias nodded. But don't drive it far. Marcus stood again, glancing toward the distant curve in the road. That turn would have killed her, he said. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. Victoria looked down at the damaged wheel. You saved my life tonight. Elias shook his head slightly. Not yet. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? Elias gestured toward the convoy. Whoever set that trap didn't expect this delay. Marcus followed his gaze. You think they're still nearby? I think someone planned this carefully, Elias said. Victoria tilted her head, and careful people check their work. A guard jogged towards them from the roadside perimeter. Sir, Marcus turned. What is it? The guard pointed down the highway. Vehicle approaching from the north. Marcus narrowed his eyes. Headlights appeared in the distance, slowly cresting a hill. Victoria's voice dropped. That wasn't one of ours. Marcus shook his head. No. The approaching lights moved slower than normal traffic. Too slow. Elias stood up fully now, watching the road. That might be your van. Marcus's hand drifted toward his sidearm. Everyone, hold positions, he ordered quietly. Guards shifted into defensive positions around the convoy. Victoria remained beside Elias, her expression unreadable. You think they came back to see if the job worked? Maybe. The headlights grew brighter as the vehicle approached. Marcus spoke into his radio. Vehicle incoming. White cargo van possibly suspect. The convoy lights reflected off the wet road as the van slowed even further. For a moment, it looked like the driver might stop. Instead, the van accelerated suddenly. Marcus cursed. That's them. Security agents stepped into the road, hands raised. The van swerved violently and disappeared down a side access road before anyone could react. Marcus lowered his weapon slowly. Damn it! The sound of the van's engine faded into the distance. Victoria looked toward the road where it vanished. They came back. Elias nodded. And now they know the trap didn't work. Marcus turned back toward him. How sure are you about that? Elias gestured towards the disabled SUV. Because if the plan had worked, he let the sentence hang. Marcus finished it. They'd be looking at a wreck right now. Victoria exhaled slowly. Instead, they saw us standing here. Marcus nodded grimly. So now they'll adapt. Elias looked down the highway again. The rain had almost stopped now, but the air still felt heavy. They already did, he said quietly. Marcus studied him. What makes you say that? Elias pointed towards the road where the van disappeared. Because whoever was driving that didn't panic. Marcus followed the thought. They were observing. Exactly. Victoria crossed her arms. They wanted confirmation. Elias nodded. And now they have it. Marcus rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. So the question becomes... Victoria finished the sentence. What do they try next? Elias looked at the convoy, then at the quiet highway stretching beyond it, his voice steady. If someone planned this that carefully, he paused, they probably planned a backup. The words settled heavily over the group. Marcus looked toward his guards. Stay alert. Victoria glanced at Elias again. You're staying with us until we reach the city. Elias blinked slightly. That wasn't the plan. Victoria gave a small, firm smile. Neither was saving my life tonight. Elias thought about Lena waiting at home, about the clock on the kitchen wall, about promises. Then he looked at the convoy again. You might need someone who knows how these traps work, Victoria said. Elias sighed quietly. He already knew she was right. And somewhere out there on a dark road, someone who had set a deadly trap now knew it had failed. The white cargo van was gone, but the tension it left behind clung to the highway like the last mist of rain. Marcus Trent stood still for a moment, staring down the access road where the van had vanished. The taillights had disappeared quickly, swallowed by darkness and wet pavement. They didn't even hesitate, one of the guards muttered. Marcus shook his head slowly. No, they came to confirm the outcome. Victoria looked back at the disabled SUV. And they confirmed it failed. Elias stood beside the vehicle, tightening the last adjustment on the temporary clamp he'd installed. The metal gave one final quiet click under his wrench. There, he said calmly. Marcus looked down. That's it for now. Marcus crouched to inspect the line again. The clamp held firm. You sure this will hold? Elias nodded. It'll hold long enough to move the vehicle slowly. Victoria studied the repair with quiet interest. You did that in the rain with a bag of basic tools. Elias wiped his hands on the rag again. Tools matter less than knowing where the problem is. Marcus straightened and looked down the road again, which means whoever set the trap knows we're still alive. Yeah, Elias replied. And if they were watching, Marcus added, they saw you fix it. Elias didn't seem concerned. That's fine. Marcus frowned. You're not worried about that? Elias shook his head. People who plan something like this don't care who fixes the first problem. Victoria tilted her head slightly. Because they already planned the second one. Elias nodded. Marcus let out a quiet breath. That's exactly what I didn't want to hear. The security chief walked towards the convoy vehicles and spoke quietly with two of his agents. Radios crackled softly as instructions spread through the team. Victoria remained beside Elias. You're very calm for someone who just discovered a murder attempt, she said. Elias glanced towards the road. Calm helps you see what everyone else misses. Victoria gave a faint smile. That sounds like training. It is. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance as the clouds began to thin. Marcus returned a moment later. We're changing the route, he said. Victoria nodded immediately. Good. So the convoy will head south instead of taking the interstate, Marcus continued. Less predictable, fewer high-speed curves. Victoria crossed her arms. That still leaves the question of who planned this. Marcus nodded. And why tonight? Elias spoke quietly. You said you were taking a call at the gas station. Victoria nodded. Yes, work call. She hesitated slightly. Confidential meeting arrangements. Marcus looked at her. The board meeting tomorrow. Victoria didn't respond, but Elias noticed the subtle tension that crossed her face. That meeting important? Elias asked. Victoria answered simply, very. Marcus looked towards the repaired SUV again. If someone wanted to stop that meeting from happening, they might start by removing the person running it. Elias finished. Right, Victoria exhaled slowly. That narrows the list of suspects considerably. Marcus nodded grimly. Corporate rivals, political enemies, anyone affected by tomorrow's vote. Elias didn't ask what the vote involved. He didn't need to. Power always created enemies. Marcus turned to the security driver nearest the repaired SUV. Bring the flatbed truck. The driver nodded and moved toward the rear of the convoy. Elias raised a hand slightly. Wait. Marcus looked back at him. What? Flatbed might shift things, Elias said. If you can avoid it, you should. Marcus frowned. You said it would hold for slow driving. Victoria glanced between them. So we drive it. Elias nodded. Carefully. Marcus rubbed his temples. That's $1 million armored vehicle. Then treat it gently, Elias said. Victoria almost laughed. Marcus looked at him again. You're coming with us. Elias sighed quietly. I figured. Marcus gestured toward the front passenger seat of the damaged SUV. You ride there. Elias blinked. You trust me that much already? Marcus shook his head. I trust you more than a mechanical failure. Victoria smiled faintly. That's practically a compliment. Elias looked toward his pickup truck parked a few yards away. His old truck sat alone in the damp, headlights off, tools scattered in the bed from the tire job. Inside the cab was his phone. On that phone were 2 missed calls from home. He imagined Lena staring at the clock again. Marcus followed his gaze. You got somewhere to be? Elias hesitated. My daughter. Victoria's voice softened slightly. How old? 9. Marcus glanced at the convoy. This won't take long. Elias wasn't convinced. But he also knew something else. Someone had just tried to kill this woman, and whoever had done it was still out there. If the trap had worked, he would have driven away, never knowing. Instead, he had seen it. And once you saw something like that, you couldn't pretend you hadn't. He grabbed his tool bag and tossed it into the back seat of the SUV. Marcus opened the driver's door. All right, he said, let's get this moving. Elias slid into the passenger seat. Victoria stepped into the rear seat behind them. The convoy engines roared to life around them. Marcus started the vehicle carefully. The repair held. Slowly, cautiously, the convoy pulled back onto the wet highway. And as they began moving again into the night, none of them realized the person who had set the trap was already planning the next one. The repaired SUV rolled forward slowly, easing onto the slick highway with the rest of the convoy forming a protective wall around it. Marcus Trent kept both hands steady on the wheel, his eyes flicking between the road ahead and the dashboard indicators. The pressure held steady for now. Elias sat in the passenger seat, watching the road the way he had earlier on the shoulder. Not the vehicles around them, not the convoy. The road. Victoria leaned forward slightly from the back seat, calm but firm. Speed. 35, Marcus answered. That's slow, she said. Slow is safe, Marcus replied. Elias nodded for the next few miles. The rain had softened into a mist now, leaving the pavement slick and reflective beneath the headlights. The rest of the security vehicles spread out around them in a tight protective formation. Marcus spoke quietly into the radio clipped near his collar. Convoy maintaining low speed. Route change confirmed. Southbound. A voice crackled back with acknowledgement. Victoria rested her hand against the back of the front seat. How far to the alternate road? Marcus glanced at his navigation screen. About 8 miles. Elias leaned slightly towards the windshield, watching the faint curve of the road ahead. That's where you'll want to slow again. Marcus frowned. You memorizing the road? Elias shrugged faintly. Habit. Victoria studied the back of his head. You really did spend a long time doing this. Elias didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, road conditions tell you a lot if you pay attention. Marcus drove in silence for another minute before speaking again. You said earlier whoever set the trap probably planned a backup. Yeah. You still think that? Elias's eyes remained on the highway. I know they did. Marcus tightened his grip on the wheel slightly. You're very certain. Because they came back, Victoria said behind them. The van, Marcus added. Elias continued watching the dark road stretching ahead. That wasn't someone panicking, he said. That was someone checking the result. Marcus nodded slowly, which means they were close. Exactly. The convoy lights reflected across a line of wet guardrails as the road dipped into a shallow valley. Victoria broke the silence. You still haven't explained something. Elias glanced at her in the rearview mirror. What? Hassan? How a mechanic spots something like that faster than a trained security team? Marcus smirked slightly. I was wondering the same thing. Elias exhaled quietly. You ever watch something break apart in slow motion? Marcus frowned. What? Vehicles designed to fail exactly when someone needs them to, Elias said. Victoria's eyes narrowed. You're describing sabotage. Elias didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. Marcus gave a short laugh under his breath. So, let me guess. You weren't just around convoys. Elias finally looked at him. No. Marcus nodded slowly. You were the guy who figured out why they failed. Elias looked back at the road. Sometimes. Victoria leaned back slightly in her seat. That's quite a career change. Yeah. Marcus glanced at him again. What made you walk away? Elias hesitated for a moment. Then he answered simply, my daughter. Victoria watched him carefully. That's it? That's enough. The SUV rolled across a small bridge spanning a narrow creek below. Water rushed beneath them, dark and swollen from the storm. Marcus checked the speed again. 32. Elias nodded approvingly. Keep it there. The radio crackled again. Lead vehicle to command, road ahead clear. Marcus answered, copy. Victoria glanced out the side window at the trees sliding past. Do you think the person who set this trap is still nearby? Elias considered that. Hard to say, but possible. The road curved gently left. Marcus slowed slightly. Still holding, he said. Elias watched the road for a moment. Then he looked up again. Something in his expression changed. Marcus noticed it immediately. What? Elias leaned forward slightly. Slow down. Marcus frowned. We're already slow. Slower. Marcus eased off the accelerator. 25. Elias kept staring ahead. Victoria felt the shift in tension. What is it? Elias pointed through the windshield. At first, Marcus didn't see anything unusual. Just wet pavement stretching forward beneath the convoy headlights. Then he noticed it. A faint shimmer across the road, almost invisible, like something slick laid thin over both lanes. Marcus's stomach dropped. Is that... Yeah, Elias said quietly. Victoria leaned forward. What are we looking at? Elias's voice remained calm. Another trap. Marcus braked carefully, bringing the SUV nearly to a crawl. The convoy vehicles behind them slowed instantly. Victoria stared at the road ahead. The thin, reflective layer stretched across both lanes like a glass sheet under the lights. Oil? She asked. Maybe, Elias said. Maybe something else. Doesn't matter. It's slick. Marcus shook his head slowly. No accident would leave a spread that even. Elias nodded. Someone laid it there. Victoria's voice dropped. Right where we'd slowed down for the curve. Marcus looked toward the tree line. Damn it. Elias scanned the dark woods on both sides of the highway. Don't stop here, he said. Marcus blinked. What? If someone set this... They're probably watching to see if it works, Elias continued. Victoria understood immediately. So if we stop, they'll know we spotted it. Marcus exhaled slowly. You're saying we keep moving? Elias nodded, but carefully. Marcus stared at the slick road ahead. Slick surface, damp air, a curve. Every instinct screamed danger. But the calm man beside him was already studying the road like a puzzle he'd solved before. All right, Marcus said quietly. You guide me. Elias nodded once, and the convoy crept forward toward the second trap, waiting in the dark. The SUV rolled forward inch by inch as Marcus eased his foot off the brake. The sheen shimmered beneath the convoy headlights like a frozen river of glass. Marcus kept the wheel steady, though his knuckles had gone pale against the leather. Tell me what to do, he said quietly. Elias leaned forward, studying the road carefully. Keep it straight, he said. No sudden steering. Victoria leaned slightly between the seats, her voice calm but tight. How far does it stretch? Marcus squinted through the windshield. Hard to tell. Elias pointed toward the faint curve ahead, about 30 yards. Perfect place for a slide. Exactly, Elias said. Marcus spoke into the radio. Convoy, hold formation, road hazard ahead. A guard's voice crackled back. Understood. Victoria studied the reflective streak. This was placed here deliberately. Yeah, Elias said, and the weather makes it worse. Marcus nodded. If we lose traction here, the convoy piles up. Elias finished. And that's what they want. Marcus glanced at him. You've thought this through already. Elias gave a faint shrug. People who build traps usually build them in layers. Victoria crossed her arms, meaning the first sabotage was only step 1. Right, Marcus muttered. Step 2 being this. The SUV crept closer. Marcus slowed even further. 20, Elias said. Good. The tension inside the vehicle thickened. Victoria broke the silence. You seem oddly familiar with this kind of planning. Elias didn't answer immediately. Marcus smirked faintly. That's because he used to fight it. Victoria raised an eyebrow. You figured that out already? Marcus nodded slightly. People who can identify patterns like this that quickly usually spent years around them. Elias stared ahead at the road. I spent years trying to stop them. The SUV's tires reached the edge of the slick patch. Marcus felt the steering wheel loosen slightly beneath his hands. Contact, he murmured. Easy, Elias said. Marcus kept his movement slow. The vehicle glided forward carefully. Victoria watched the road intently. What exactly did they use? Elias leaned forward slightly. Something that kills traction. The SUV slid slightly to the left. Marcus corrected gently. Easy, Elias repeated. The curve ahead loomed closer. Marcus's heartbeat thudded steadily in his ears. You ever done this before? He asked. Yeah, Elias said. Marcus glanced at him briefly. How many times? Enough. The SUV moved deeper across the slick section. Behind them, the convoy vehicles followed carefully. Victoria spoke softly. Whoever planned this assumed the first trap would disable the car. Right, Elias said. So this would finish it. Marcus nodded grimly. Multiple vehicles crashing on a blind curve. Elias watched the road carefully. That would guarantee it. The tires began to regain grip as they approached the end of the slick stretch. Marcus exhaled slowly, almost through. The SUV reached safer pavement again. The steering wheel firmed in his hands. Marcus let out a quiet breath of relief. Behind them, the convoy rolled safely across as well. Victoria leaned back slightly in her seat. That's 2. Elias nodded, which means whoever set them planned this route carefully. Marcus glanced at the navigation screen. We're almost at the alternate road. Victoria looked toward the dark highway behind them. Do you think they expected us to get this far? Elias considered that. Probably not. Marcus smirked. Good. Elias shook his head slightly. Don't celebrate yet. Marcus frowned. You think there's another one? Maybe. Victoria leaned forward again. You're telling me someone spent hours setting multiple traps across public roads? Yeah. Marcus tapped the steering wheel thoughtfully. That kind of planning takes resources. Victoria nodded slowly. And motive. The SUV continued down the highway as the trees thinned ahead. Marcus pointed forward. There! The intersection appeared under a blinking yellow light. Their alternate road. Elias studied it carefully. Then his expression hardened. Marcus noticed immediately. What now? Elias pointed toward the intersection. See that? Marcus squinted. At first, it looked like nothing. Then he noticed it. A dark vehicle parked just beyond the junction. Engine running. Lights off. Victoria's voice lowered. That wasn't there earlier. Marcus slowed the SUV. Someone's waiting. Elias nodded. Yeah. Marcus's hand tightened slightly on the wheel. Ambush. Maybe, Elias said, or confirmation. Victoria's voice remained steady. Marcus. Yes, ma'am. Don't stop. Marcus nodded slowly. The SUV continued rolling toward the intersection. The dark vehicle ahead remained motionless. Watching. If you're enjoying this story so far, subscribe and stay with us. The next few moments are where the real plan behind this attack finally starts to reveal itself. Inside the SUV, Elias kept his eyes locked on the shadowed car ahead, because something about the way it waited there told him one thing. The traps on the road were never the final move. They were only meant to slow the convoy down. The SUV rolled closer to the intersection, its headlights cutting through the mist that still hung low over the road. The dark vehicle ahead remained parked just beyond the blinking yellow light, engine idling softly, headlights still off. Marcus slowed but did not stop. Distance? He asked quietly. Elias leaned forward slightly, studying the silhouette. Maybe 50 yards? Victoria remained calm in the back seat, though her eyes never left the vehicle waiting at the junction. That car has been sitting there long enough to know we're coming. Marcus nodded. Yeah. The convoy behind them tightened formation instinctively, black SUVs spreading slightly across the road to shield the vehicle carrying Victoria. Marcus spoke into the radio. Unknown vehicle at intersection, possible contact. A voice crackled back. Do we engage? Marcus glanced at Elias. What do you think? Elias watched the vehicle carefully. Driver hasn't moved yet. Victoria leaned forward again. If it's the same group who set the traps, they already know the convoy survived. Elias nodded, which means this part of the plan doesn't rely on surprise. Marcus frowned slightly. Then what does it rely on? Elias pointed towards the intersection position. Marcus looked again. The parked car sat at a slight angle, nose pointed toward the road they were about to turn onto, blocking part of the lane. Marcus's voice dropped. That's not a coincidence. No, Elias said. The SUV continued creeping forward. 30 yards now. The silhouette inside the parked car became clearer beneath the dim intersection light. One person in the driver's seat, still unmoving. Victoria spoke calmly. Marcus, do not stop the vehicle unless absolutely necessary. Marcus nodded. Understood. Elias's gaze shifted briefly toward the tree line on both sides of the road. Dark still, but that didn't mean empty. Slow, Elias murmured. Marcus eased the brake slightly. The SUV rolled forward almost silently now. Behind them, the convoy adjusted its spacing. 20 yards. The parked car remained motionless. Marcus narrowed his eyes. Why isn't he moving? Elias studied the car's tires. Because he doesn't need to. Marcus blinked. What? Look at the angle. Marcus looked again. The car wasn't blocking the road completely. It was positioned just enough to force their SUV to slow and adjust slightly left, right where the shoulder dipped toward a shallow drainage ditch. Marcus felt a cold realization settle in his stomach. That's not a roadblock, he said. No, Elias agreed. It's a funnel. Victoria's voice sharpened. Explain. Elias pointed towards the edge of the pavement. Soft ground. Marcus saw it now. Rainwater had turned the shoulder into dark mud. If we drift off the lane while turning, Marcus said slowly, the car slides. Elias finished. And once the lead vehicle loses control, the convoy crashes behind it, Victoria said grimly. They were 10 yards away now. The driver inside the parked car finally moved. Slowly, the headlights illuminated his face just enough to reveal a calm expression. Watching. Waiting. Marcus spoke into the radio quietly. Convoy, prepare for rapid maneuver. A guard's voice answered. Copy. Elias leaned forward. Don't take the turn. Marcus frowned. What? If you turn normally, he wins. Victoria understood immediately. So we go straight. Marcus shook his head. There's no road straight ahead. Elias pointed toward a narrow maintenance lane barely visible between two trees beyond the intersection. There is now. Marcus squinted. That's barely wide enough. It's enough. The parked driver seemed to realize something was wrong. His car's engine revved suddenly. Marcus reacted instantly. "Hold on!" He accelerated. The SUV surged forward toward the intersection. The driver in the parked car slammed his own vehicle into motion, swinging across the lane to block them. But Marcus didn't turn. Instead, he drove straight past the intersection and veered sharply toward the narrow maintenance lane Elias had spotted. The SUV bounced over uneven pavement and slid briefly on wet gravel before stabilizing. Behind them, the convoy vehicles reacted instantly, following the unexpected maneuver. The blocking car screeched to a halt in the intersection. Too late. Marcus steered the SUV down the narrow path between the trees. Branches scraped along the sides of the vehicle. Victoria gripped the seat tightly as the convoy thundered behind them. Marcus glanced at Elias. "You knew that road was there." Elias shook his head slightly. "I noticed it." Marcus laughed once under his breath. "Same difference." The narrow lane curved sharply through the trees before reconnecting with the main highway further south. Marcus checked the mirrors. The convoy was still intact behind them. No crashes, no spinouts. Victoria exhaled slowly. That was the final piece. Elias nodded. "Yeah." Marcus looked back toward the highway they'd avoided. The blocked intersection faded behind them through the trees. "That driver expected us to follow the route." "Exactly," Elias said. "First the Sabotage," Marcus said. "Then the slick road, then the funnel." Elias nodded. 3 separate traps." Victoria's voice turned colder. "Which means whoever planned this knew our route, our timing, and our security procedures." Elias nodded. Marcus looked at him again. "You ever deal with someone this thorough before?" Elias thought for a moment. Then he answered quietly. "Yeah." Victoria asked the obvious question. "Did you stop them?" Elias looked ahead at the road opening back toward the highway. Eventually, the lane emptied back onto the main highway with a jolt that rattled the suspension. Marcus eased the SUV onto the pavement, checking the mirrors immediately. One by one, the black convoy vehicles followed, headlights sweeping through the trees as they rejoined the road. No crashes, no pursuit. For the first time since the night began, the highway stretched ahead without traps, blockades, or waiting headlights. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Convoy status," he said into the radio. A guard's voice answered quickly. "All vehicles intact, no damage." Marcus nodded. "Good." Elias leaned back slightly in the passenger seat, watching the road behind them in the side mirror. The intersection they had bypassed was already far behind. Victoria sat quietly in the back seat, absorbing everything that had happened over the last hour. 3 traps, 3 different methods, all designed to end the same way. Her car crashing, her convoy piling up behind it, her death disguised as a catastrophic accident. Marcus broke the silence. "That guy back there wasn't improvising." "No," Elias said. "He expected the second trap to finish the job." Elias nodded. "And when we slowed, he expected the funnel." Marcus tapped the steering wheel thoughtfully. "But the plan assumed something." Elias looked at him. "That you drive exactly where he wanted," Marcus said. Elias didn't deny it. Victoria leaned forward slightly. "You didn't just see them," she said. "You designed ways around them." Elias didn't answer. Marcus glanced at him. "Convoy defense, right?" Elias stared out the windshield for a moment. Finally, he said quietly, "Something like that." Marcus gave a short laugh. "That explains why a roadside mechanic just outplayed someone who planned a 3-stage assassination attempt." Victoria studied the calm man sitting in front of her. "You didn't panic once tonight," she said. Elias shrugged. "Panic doesn't fix mechanical problems." The convoy continued down the quiet highway, tires humming steadily against the wet asphalt. The storm clouds were beginning to break apart in the east, revealing the faint gray edge of morning. Marcus checked the navigation screen. "City limits in 12 minutes. Victoria nodded slowly. "That means whoever planned this has officially failed." Elias shook his head slightly. Marcus glanced at him. "You disagree?" "They failed tonight," Elias said. "But people who plan something like that don't give up after one attempt." Victoria crossed her arms. "That's a problem for tomorrow." Marcus smirked faintly. "Preferably one solved with law enforcement instead of roadside mechanics." Elias finally allowed himself the smallest smile. "Probably a good plan." Marcus's radio crackled again. "Lead vehicle to command." "Go ahead," Marcus replied. "We've got police units waiting at the southern checkpoint." Victoria nodded. I called ahead. Marcus looked impressed when you two were discussing brake lines. Efficient, Elias said, almost amused. The city lights began to glow faintly on the horizon. The convoy rolled past another mile marker, the skyline slowly rising ahead like a wall of glass catching the first hints of sunrise. Victoria leaned forward again. Elias. He turned slightly. Yes? You stopped tonight because you saw a woman stranded on the road. Yeah. You had no idea who I was. Nope. And you stayed when things became dangerous. Elias glanced towards the road ahead. Someone had to. Victoria's voice softened slightly. You saved my life. Elias shook his head. Your security team would have figured it out eventually. Marcus snorted. Not before that curve. The highway widened as the first outer lights of the city appeared. Marcus slowed slightly as flashing blue lights came into view ahead. 2 police cruisers waited at the checkpoint. Looks like your backup arrived, Marcus said. Victoria nodded. Good. Marcus guided the SUV toward the checkpoint while the convoy vehicles formed a protective arc around them. Police officers stepped forward, watching the approaching convoy carefully. Marcus rolled down the window. Evening, officers. One of them looked at the damaged tire and the grease-stained man in the passenger seat. Rough night, the officer said. Marcus smirked. You have no idea. Victoria opened the rear door and stepped out of the vehicle. The officers immediately straightened when they recognized her. Miss Hale. Victoria nodded politely. Thank you for meeting us. Marcus and Elias stepped out as well. The cool, early morning air carried the smell of wet pavement and distant traffic. One of the officers gestured toward the convoy. We'll escort you the rest of the way into the city. Victoria nodded. Appreciated. Marcus stretched slightly, tension finally easing from his shoulders. He looked at Elias. Well, he said, you officially turned the worst night of my career into a successful one. Elias shrugged. Just fixing problems. Victoria stepped closer to him. You did more than that. Elias looked at the convoy, the police lights, and the city skyline beyond them. For a moment, standing there as a black single dad in a space built for power and polished shoes, he felt the old distance he used to feel, like he was always a step outside the room, even when he'd earned the right to be in it. The night's danger was finally behind them, but one question still lingered. Victoria spoke quietly. Why didn't you leave after fixing the tire? Elias thought about Lena waiting at home, about promises, about the old instincts that never really went away. Once I saw the trap, he said simply. I couldn't pretend it wasn't there. Marcus nodded slowly. That's exactly why we're all still standing. The police escort vehicles pulled into position ahead of the convoy. Victoria looked at Elias one more time. You should come to the office tomorrow. Elias blinked. Why? Victoria smiled faintly. Because the people who tried to kill me tonight are about to discover something very unfortunate. Elias raised an eyebrow. What's that? Victoria glanced toward the city. That the man they didn't plan for is now paying attention. The police escort moved ahead of the convoy, blue lights cutting through the early gray of morning. The city skyline rose slowly on the horizon, glass towers catching the first faint hints of sunrise. Marcus guided the SUV forward at a steady pace. Behind them, the rest of the convoy followed in perfect formation. For the first time since Elias Mitchell had pulled over to help a stranded driver, the road ahead looked safe. Victoria sat quietly in the back seat, watching the quiet mechanic through the rearview mirror. You never answered my question, she said. Elias glanced back slightly. Which one? How someone with your experience ends up fixing transmissions on the side of a highway. Marcus smirked faintly as he drove. Yeah, that part still feels incomplete. Elias looked out the windshield again. I used to do a job where people studied ways to destroy vehicles, he said quietly. Marcus nodded. Convoy defense? Something like that. Victoria leaned forward slightly. And you left? Elias nodded once. Marcus raised an eyebrow. People don't usually walk away from jobs like that. Elias's voice remained calm. They do when they realize their daughter needs a father more than the country needs another engineer. Victoria fell silent for a moment. The SUV passed beneath an overpass, shadows briefly sweeping across the cabin. Marcus broke the quiet. So you traded armored convoys for brake jobs? Elias gave a faint shrug. Turns out engines are easier to deal with than politics. Victoria smiled slightly. I imagine so. The convoy rolled through the southern checkpoint and entered the outskirts of the city. Traffic lights blinked green over empty streets as dawn slowly spread across the sky. Marcus glanced towards the police vehicles ahead. Once we reach the office tower, local authorities will take over the investigation. Victoria nodded. Good. Elias watched the buildings growing taller around them. Glass towers, corporate headquarters, places he hadn't stepped inside since he'd left his old life behind. Marcus slowed as the convoy turned onto a wide boulevard lined with security gates. The massive Hale Cybernetics building rose at the end of the street like a wall of steel and glass. Marcus let out a low whistle. Impressive. Elias studied the structure silently. Victoria noticed. You don't seem impressed. I've seen bigger, Elias replied calmly. Marcus laughed under his breath. Of course you have. The convoy rolled into the private entrance where a team of security officers waited. Police cruisers peeled away as the SUVs stopped in front of the doors. Marcus parked and turned off the engine. The sudden silence inside the vehicle felt strange after hours of tension. Victoria stepped out first. The security team immediately moved toward her. Ma'am, we've secured the perimeter, one of them reported. Good, she replied. Marcus stepped out and stretched his shoulders. Then Elias climbed out last, grabbing his worn tool bag from the back seat. The mechanic looked completely out of place beside armored vehicles and corporate security. His grease-stained jacket, his dark skin, his work-worn hands, but every person there knew exactly what he had done. Marcus leaned against the SUV door. You know, he said, tonight was supposed to be routine. Elias smirked faintly. They never are. Victoria walked back toward him. You should stay, she said. Elias blinked. For what? For the briefing, she said. Marcus crossed his arms. She's right. Whoever planned that attack will try again. Elias shook his head slowly. My daughter's been waiting for me all night. Victoria paused. How far away do you live? About 20 minutes outside the city. She considered that. Then she nodded once. Fair enough. Marcus glanced between them. But if those people try something again... Elias slung the tool bag over his shoulder. You'll call. Marcus smiled. Oh, we will. Victoria stepped closer, extending her hand. Elias hesitated briefly before shaking it. Her grip was firm. You changed the outcome of tonight, she said quietly. Elias shrugged. Just noticed a problem early. Victoria's expression softened. No, she said. You did something much more important. Elias raised an eyebrow. What's that? She gestured towards the convoy, the security teams, and the massive building behind them. You reminded everyone here that power and money don't always save the day. Marcus nodded. Sometimes the guy with the wrench does. Elias chuckled quietly. Well, I should get home. Marcus watched him start toward the exit gate. You know, the security chief called out, if you ever get bored fixing transmissions... Elias glanced back. Marcus smirked. We could use someone who sees traps before they happen. Elias considered that for a second. Then he shook his head with a small smile. My daughter already thinks I work too much. Victoria watched him walk away toward the quiet street beyond the gate. A single father, tool bag over his shoulder, reins still clinging to his jacket. The man who had quietly dismantled a 3-stage assassination attempt without raising his voice once. Marcus followed her gaze. Funny thing, he said. What? Victoria asked. The people who planned tonight studied every security detail we had. Victoria nodded slowly, except one. Marcus smiled faintly. The mechanic. And somewhere across town, as the first light of morning spread over the city, Elias Mitchell drove home to a little girl who still believed her father just fixed cars. Elias Mitchell's pickup rumbled quietly along the empty road leading away from the city. The early morning sky had begun to brighten, soft gray light spreading across the fields and low hills outside town. The storm had passed completely now, leaving the pavement dark and glistening behind him. For the first time all night, there were no flashing lights in his mirrors, no convoy engines, no security radios, just the steady hum of his old truck. He rested one arm on the steering wheel as he drove, exhaustion finally catching up with him. The adrenaline that had carried him through the traps and narrow escapes was fading, leaving only the quiet weight of the night behind. 3 traps, 1 assassination attempt, all hidden behind something as simple as a flat tire. He shook his head slightly. Life had a strange way of dragging the past back into view. The small house at the end of his street came into sight just as the first rays of sunlight touched the rooftops. The porch light was still on. That made him smile. Lena always left it on when she was worried. He pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. For a moment, he just sat there, listening to the cooling tick of the truck's engine and the faint sound of birds waking in the trees. Then the front door opened. A small figure ran out onto the porch. "Dad!" Lena Mitchell sprinted across the yard in her oversized hoodie and socks, her hair still messy from sleep, soft coils flattened on one side, the rest gathered into loose little puffs that never stayed neat through the night. Elias barely had time to step out of the truck before she threw her arms around him. "You're late," she said into his jacket. He hugged her tightly. "Yeah," he admitted softly. "Little longer night than I expected." She leaned back and looked up at him. "You okay?" "Yeah." He paused, then added, "You look tired." She wrinkled her nose. "Fixing cars all night will do that." He laughed quietly. "That's what happens." Lena squinted at him like she didn't fully believe the excuse. "You always say that." He brushed her hair back gently. "Because it's usually true." She looked towards the truck. "Did someone break down again?" Elias glanced toward the sunrise stretching over the quiet street. "Something like that." She nodded like it made perfect sense. To her, it probably did. They walked back toward the house together. Inside, the kitchen smelled faintly like toast and warm coffee. The neighbor who had stayed with Lena overnight had left a small note on the table. "Everything's fine. She stayed up waiting for you." Elias smiled and set the note aside. Lena climbed into her chair and watched him pour coffee. "You saved someone again, didn't you?" she said casually. Elias paused mid-pour. "What makes you think that?" She shrugged. "You always look like that when you help people." He raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Like you're pretending it wasn't a big deal." He laughed quietly and slid a plate of toast toward her. "You're too smart." She grinned proudly. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes while sunlight slowly filled the small kitchen. On the wall near the hallway, a framed photo caught the light. Elias, Lena, and a woman with warm brown skin and a bright smile, all of them squeezed together like they were holding on to something worth protecting. Across the city, inside a glass tower surrounded by security teams and investigators, Victoria Hale was already beginning the process of finding out who had planned the attack. Marcus Trent was reviewing highway camera footage. Police were searching for a white cargo van. And somewhere out there, the people responsible were realizing something had gone very wrong. Because the quiet mechanic they hadn't planned for had dismantled every step of their operation. Back in the small kitchen, Lena looked up from her breakfast. "So what happened this time?" Elias leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said slowly, "someone had a flat tire." "And?" Lena pressed, eyes narrowing. Elias's mouth twitched like he was trying not to smile. "And a few other problems." Lena nodded thoughtfully. "Did you fix them?" He met her eyes. "Yeah." She took another bite of toast and seemed satisfied with that answer. Outside, the morning was fully awake now. The world moved forward the way it always did after long nights. But Elias knew something had shifted. Sometimes the most powerful people in the world overlooked the quiet ones kneeling beside a broken wheel on the side of the road. Sometimes the person they ignored was the only reason they survived the night. And sometimes the man fixing the tire turned out to be the one person no assassin had planned for. If you enjoyed this story and want another powerful one, ask me for the next story title. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Single dad was fired from the hospital, then the ER went dark. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?